My name is Alicia Roberts Novak, and I'm the host of the Generation X Studio. We felt that, this would be a good way for us to kind of talk about an era that seems to be kind of forgotten, right?
Welcome to the Gen X Studio, where members of Generation X come onto the show to tell their stories. Our goal is to document not only the experiences of growing up Generation X, but also share our perspectives with future generations, in the hope that they can learn about the past and use that knowledge to help build a better future. Join us and find out what makes Generation X great. Let's go. What is Gen X Studio?
Gen X Studio is a video podcast that's dedicated to everything Generation X. And we're also going to hear from other Generation Xers. So we want to hear their stories. We're going to see their photos. We're going to listen to what it was like growing up Generation X. We're going to look at memorabilia. We're going to look at technology. We're going to look at history. We're going to look at the culture, the fashion, the music. And we're hoping that we'll use this as an opportunity to educate not just the present generations, but future generations.
Why did you decide to work on this project?
My background actually is as a consultant, a global consultant. I do strategic management and organizational development for companies. But then as I started to work in the community, I felt that there was a better way of being able to market companies by telling their stories. So I started shooting videos and documentaries and kind of amateur films about what was going on in the communities, what made people kind of motivated to do the things that they wanted to do. And in doing that, I was able to hear a lot of personal stories. And so when we started thinking about what is it like growing up Generation X and how we can actually get people interested in this project, which is basically a non-for-profit to support educational scholarships and job opportunities for our youth, we felt that, this would be a good way for us to kind of talk about an era that seems to be kind of forgotten, right?
Why do you think storytelling is important?
So for me, when I was asked to come on the project and tell my story about where I came from so that maybe I could kind of share some of my experiences to help someone else, I realized that storytelling gives people a lot of power. It gives people an opportunity to kind of say, you know what, you're not the only one that went through this. So as you kind of meet people and you tell these stories, you kind of figure out hey, you know what, we have some things in common that actually bring us together as opposed to pulling us apart.
How does story help us understand each other?
And I feel like people always want to tell someone else's story. And it really, to me, it relegates the other person to feel as if they don't belong, right? As opposed to being able to kind of have the opportunity to tell your own story. And I think that when people are able to kind of share their experiences, not only does the listener begin to sympathize or empathize with the person, I think that it starts to break down those silos and those barriers and those walls, because now we get to see what we have in common as opposed to why we don't have things in common, right?
Why focus on Generation X?
Why Gen X? Oh, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, there's so much stuff that happened if you think about it. If you go from when I was born at the beginning of the 70s, you had as they know, the decade, of love. It was free love. Drugs was a major part of it, as well as the fact that you had women's lib that was coming into its own. So you had a lot of women that were going into the workforce. We were burning bras. But then you had people who were coming back from Vietnam. You had a lot of people who we're looking at it and going, you know what, even if I was, younger in the beginning of the 70s, by the time we were 80s, we were teenagers. So now you had the crack epidemic, you had hip hop, you had rap, you had all of these things that affect our lives today. And I don't think our kids really know what the infancy stage was and what it was like to be a kid and all of a sudden be handed literally a computer in your hand.
What are the key components of the Gen X project?
We were asked basically to put together a museum exhibit, and that's how the project started, of me and 5 other friends thinking about if we were to build out our own museum exhibit based on our experience with Generation X, what would it look like? And that's kind of how the project started. And with that, we started a 501c3 to help us fund building out our educational interactive mobile museum. And with that, it's based on 5 components. There is the actual history of Generation X and also the individuals whose the exhibit is about. In this case, it's a school on the south side of Chicago. And then it's about them actually being able to make submissions of their photos and their stories, which will be part of the exhibit. And then we ask them to add in different memorabilia during that time period to kind of talk about what it was like to grow up with these items so that the actual people who are coming to see the exhibit could actually kind of say, oh, I remember that we used telephones during that time period. But also for people who are maybe my kids' age or younger, are like, why does your phones look that way? Or what is that particular item? Because they don't use them anymore because they're obsolete. And then we also have a studio that's part of our exhibit that basically is a videography of all of our visionaries who went on to do amazing things. For example, Damon Williams, who's a wonderful comedian, a wonderful actor, who's an alumni of that particular school, who's going to talk about what was it like growing up Generation X and what led him into his type of career. The last part of that is that we are coming up with an archive, which we're hoping that we're going to get a sponsor for to build so that everybody can be able to tell their stories in this archive. I watch a lot of Finding Your Roots, and I realized that in doing that, you can hear about, the person's name was this, they were born here, they did this for a living. That's pretty much all you really know, unless there's some kind of article that kind of tells you a little bit about their experience. We're taking that and we're flipping it on its head. So that way you get the person's information and what they do for a living, but at the same time, you get to hear an actual story about who came before them, what it was like growing up in their own words. And also, like, what are they doing right now to be able to not only play it forward, but also be part of the project? And it goes into the National Archive. So that's kind of interesting that, we have that opportunity to work with some of our partners who are like, this is something that needs to be preserved for history.
Is there a plan to expand the project?
Yeah, actually, we're hoping to take this to many different schools throughout the state of Illinois first, but then making it a national project because we thought it was really important to be able to not only be able to showcase Generation Xers and to talk about the history, but also to be able to attach this to an educational program so that we could help the kids learn how to not only create their own museum exhibits, but also be able to tell their stories. Because every time we move to a different part of our tour, as we have a mobile museum, we want to make sure that we can not only expand it, we can get other people to join us to raise funds to make sure that we're giving back to those communities.
I'm Gen X. How can I share my stories?
Well, if you tune into the Generation X studio, we'll have information about how you can make your submission, how you can submit your photo, how you can submit your story, and maybe even a piece of memorabilia. I can't wait for you guys to join us because it's going to be so much fun. And as well, we're going to be booking guests soon, so you can come on and tell your story online.